It rained in New York today. From the window of my apartment, I look at the building across the way, at the mime class that I manage. I see the children in the class, spinning on their toes and moving about in their colorful clothes. My daughter is there. She's my assistant, and we work together. At a gesture from my daughter, the children are no longer on their toes, and my daughter shows them how to relax their muscles. I get ready to go join them. Among the children there's a little girl with glasses. She reminds me of my own childhood. She's exactly the same age I was when I went to Madame Dismailova's class. She's taken her glasses off and put them on a chair. She's right. You can't practice with glasses. I wore glasses too when I was Madame Dismailova's student. But I didn't wear them during practice. Without glasses, everything becomes blurry and unclear. Without glasses, people and objects would become hazy and shapeless. The world without glasses was no longer harsh and sharp. It became like a pillow I wanted to press my cheek against it so much that I'd fall asleep. A big, feathery pillow. Without glasses, I was so in the clouds that Papa would say, "Catherine, put your glasses on. What are you daydreaming about again?" At Papa's words, I'd put my glasses on and return from the soft, formless world of imagination to the sharp, harsh real world. With glasses on, I couldn't wander in the world of imagination anymore. When we came to New York, I joined a mime group. Then, with Mama, we started a mime class. Now Mama has retired. I run the class without Mama. Of course, with my daughter's help. I think Papa should retire too. But from what? I never really understood what Papa's job was. Mama and Papa live in Greenwich Village now. There's nothing special about them to tell. We're like any other New Yorkers. Except that before we came here and became New Yorkers, we lived in the 10th arrondissement. Almost 30 years have passed since then. We lived above what looked like a shop or a warehouse. Every night at 7 o'clock, Papa would pull down the metal shutter. The ground floor looked like a train station luggage room in the provinces. Like those rooms where travelers leave their suitcases and belongings, and then they get shipped to their owners. There were always lots of boxes and junk piled up in the corner of the warehouse. There was also a big scale. The scale's pan was almost level with the ground. The scale was used for weighing very heavy things up to 300 kilograms. I never saw anything actually weighed on it. Just every now and then, Papa would go and stand on it. At times when Monsieur Casterade wasn't there, Papa would put his hands in his pockets. He'd stand on the scale, head down, motionless. Papa would stare thoughtfully at the scale's pointer. I remember the pointer showed the number 67. Sometimes Papa would notice me staring at him without blinking. He'd say, "Catherine, do you want to come too?" I'd run to him and get on the scale. We'd both stand on the scale. Papa would put his hand on my shoulder. We wouldn't move. We'd stand perfectly still, as if someone were about to take our picture and we were posing for it. Papa and I both wore glasses. On the scale, I would take my glasses off. Papa would take his glasses off too. Then we'd sink into the hazy, unclear world of imagination. Time would stand still in that imaginary world. We'd feel good. Until suddenly, Monsieur Casterade would show up. Monsieur Casterade was Papa's partner. One time he caught us standing on the scale. He showed up when we least expected it, as usual. He asked, "Hey, what are you two doing on the scale?" With Monsieur Casterade's question, our connection to our dream world shattered. Papa and I quickly put our glasses back on and returned from the world of imagination to the real world. Papa said, "What are we doing on the scale?" Well, obviously, we were weighing ourselves. Monsieur Casterade gave us a suspicious look. Then, as if we weren't worth another word, he turned away angrily. He went behind the glass wall at the back of the hall. That's where the two walnut desks with swivel chairs were. One of the desks was Papa's, and the other was for Monsieur Casterade. When Mama left, Papa went into business with Monsieur Casterade. When she was 20, she came to Paris from America with her theater group. That's when she met Papa, and they got married. Mama had performed in big Parisian venues like the Empire and the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées. But she still missed her home country. That's why, a few years later, she went back to America. Papa had promised her that as soon as he sorted out his business and trade, we would join her. That's what Papa said. But gradually, I understood there were other reasons for Mama's leaving. Separate letters with red and blue borders arrived from me and Papa from America. Mama's letters always ended with the same sentence. Catherine, I kiss you with all my heart. From your mama, who is always thinking of you. Mama's letters were full of spelling mistakes. Well, Mama was American. It wasn't surprising her letters were full of mistakes. Truth be told, Papa wasn't fond of his partner, Raymond Casterade. He called him Sticky Clutch, or Clutch Sticky. For example, he'd say, Catherine, I can't pick you up today. Sticky Clutch said I have to stay. Said we have a lot of work. We have to work all night, just to get on the good side of Clutch Sticky. Monsieur Casterade was dark-haired, a tall, burly man with black eyes and hair. He was very serious and grumpy. His torso was very long. The length of this torso made it so you couldn't see his legs move. The way he walked, you'd think he was gliding on roller skates instead of walking. Later, I found out Papa had first hired Monsieur Casterade as an assistant because he had a literature degree. Papa was actually looking for someone who could write properly. But then he ended up going into partnership with Sticky Clutch, or Clutch Sticky, a partner who would scold and criticize Papa over every little thing. As soon as he sat at his desk, he would calmly open the newspaper. He'd sit behind his desk, take off his glasses, and with his southern accent, rapidly recite all the accidents and crimes from across the country for Papa. After a while, when he got no reaction from Papa, he'd say, George, are you listening to me? You seem to be off somewhere else. I guess, since you lack the courage to face the real world, you prefer to constantly wallow in thoughts and imagination. Don't you think it's better to put your glasses on and join the real world? Papa would say reluctantly, is it really necessary? Even though it wasn't necessary, Papa would be forced to put his glasses on. Sticky Clutch also enjoyed leaning towards Papa, staring at him, and dictating letters to him in a loud voice. I'd seen that scene many times. Papa, frustrated, would type the letters that Monsieur Casterade read aloud. But he didn't dare say that those letters were useless. Monsieur Casterade would spell out the letters word by word. Then he'd remind him about punctuation marks. Papa would turn to his partner and tear up the letter. Clutch Sticky liked dictating to me too. He considered it one of his duties to dictate to me, even without being asked. And I had no choice but to accept his kindness. Sometimes I'd get a good grade, but my teacher would write on my homework, off topic. Every time Papa saw my teacher's comment, he'd say, if you see that the dictation you've written has nothing to do with your lesson topic, tear it up and write something on your own. Monsieur Casterade wasn't around. Papa would imitate him. When Papa said these things with his southern accent, I'd burst out laughing. Then Papa would say again, Mademoiselle, please be serious. Instead of laughing and daydreaming, pay attention to the periods, quotes, and parentheses in your text. Put your glasses on, so you can see the world as it is, not as you wish it to be. Papa often picked me up from school and took me to his office. One time, when I'd gotten my report card, Monsieur Casterade told me to show it to him. I gave him the report card. Monsieur Casterade, with a cigarette holder between his teeth, carefully examined the report card. Then, with his black eyes fixed on me, he said, Mademoiselle, you have truly disappointed me. I expected much more from you, especially in dictation. I took my glasses off, so I wouldn't hear his voice anymore. Right then, Papa said, be quiet. I don't want to hear anything about grades or dictation. Leave this poor child alone. Monsieur Casterade arrogantly shook his head quickly, stood up, and said, very well, fine. Then, as usual, he glided around the office on his invisible roller skates and disappeared. It was one of his skills. Papa and I would always stare at his way of walking, or rather, gliding, and then look at each other over the top of our glasses. Later, when we went to America, the shop on Rue de Hauteville and Monsieur Casterade seemed so far away. So much so that we'd ask ourselves, did they even really exist, or were they just thoughts and imagination? One night, while walking in Central Park, I asked Papa, why was Monsieur Casterade so important in our work and family life? Why did he dictate to you or give you moral lessons, and you never dared to say anything to him? After a pause, Papa admitted, there was nothing else I could do. Castorade had saved me from a big mess. Papa didn't give me any more details about the incident. But one time when Monsieur Castorade was very angry, I heard him say to Papa, "My dear George, don't forget, only a true friend saves a man from the clutches of justice." When Monsieur Castorade met Papa, he had just quit his job. Before meeting Papa, he had taught French in a school in the suburbs. But what had encouraged Papa to hire Monsieur Castorade was his love for poetry and literature. Monsieur Castorade had published several poetry books. Papa had great respect for writers and poets. I still have one of the poetry books Papa brought from Paris in the bookcase of my apartment. It's called Romantic Ballads. The publisher of the book is the poet himself. In the city, in brief, it said on the back, "Raymond Castorade, winner of the Literary Competition of Languedoc, Moustier Sainte-Marie, and the Literary Federation of Gascony, North Africa. Address, 10th Arrondissement of Paris, 15 Rue d'Hauteville." Above the shop door on Rue d'Hauteville, there was a sign right above the frosted glass window that didn't attract customers' attention. In large azure blue letters, it said, "Castorade and Certitude Experience." Certitude was our last name, mine and Papa's. Here in America, people struggle to pronounce our last name. But in Paris, the pronunciation was very clear, easy, and even melodic. Papa told me that originally our last name was much more complicated, something like Certstskadzi or Shartshitotswili. One summer afternoon, just before the war, when Papa was very young, he went to the registry office for a birth certificate. Right there in that sunny, quiet registry office, our last name was simplified. The clerk read Papa's last name several times. Then, as if a swarm of bees had attacked him, he heard a buzzing in his head. Papa's last name made the clerk break into a sweat. As he wiped the sweat from his forehead, he suggested to Papa, "Your last name is exhausting. Honestly, it's a bit much. No offense, but instead of being heard, it just buzzes in your ear. Would you like to simplify it a little?" My father shrugged and said, "Whatever you think is best." The clerk immediately said, "Good, good. So from now on, your last name is Certitude." That's why the sign above the shop read, "Castorade and Certitude. Experience." I didn't know what experience meant. I'd asked Papa several times, but he didn't seem to like talking about it. Every time I asked, he wouldn't give me a straight answer. I thought to myself, maybe it stood for transport and haulage, or maybe export and import. All night, I'd hear the sound of trucks coming and going. Sometimes trucks would stop in front of the shop with their engines running. When I went to the window, I'd see men entering the shop with boxes, or taking boxes out. Papa and Monsieur Castorade would be standing on the sidewalk. Like symphony orchestra conductors, they'd manage this nightly traffic. Papa, with a logbook in his hand, would jot things down rapidly as the men came and went, probably recording the number of boxes leaving or entering the shop. A while ago, I found a page from that logbook among some old junk. Radio equipment, screws and bolts, out, 10:01 p.m. Shoes and bags, in, 10:20 p.m. Sportswear, out, 11 p.m. Toolkit and electric motor, in, 12:03 a.m. Electric motor was crossed out. In its place, in Monsieur Castorade's handwriting, was written Dynamo. At the bottom of the page, Papa had signed it. That familiar, messy signature. Every night I'd watch the trucks come and go. The next morning I'd go to school near the shop. My school was on Rue de Petits Hotels. Every day, Papa would raise the metal shutter to take me to school. We'd see Monsieur Castorade every day on Rue de Hauteville. He'd be heading to the office. That is, Castorade and Certitude Experience. We'd be heading towards school. When we passed each other, we'd nod. Papa would say, "See you later, Raymond." Monsieur Castorade would nod back and say, "See you later, George." Then Monsieur Castorade's long torso would glide down Rue de Hauteville at top speed. Since Rue de Hauteville was a downhill slope, when we reached the school, Papa would pat me on the shoulder and say, "Have a good day, Catherine. If you don't get a good grade in dictation, it doesn't matter at all." I never got good grades in dictation either. Now I know that what Papa said wasn't out of indifference to his daughter's studies. He just didn't want Monsieur Castorade's harsh words to affect me. He didn't want me to be afraid of school or dictation, or to become discouraged. Unlike Monsieur Castorade, Papa wanted to reassure and encourage me. I ate lunch in the school cafeteria twice a week, but on the other days, Papa would pick me up and we'd go to his favorite local restaurant, Restaurant Picardy, on Rue de Chabrol. Monsieur Castorade also ate at Restaurant Picardy. We'd stand on the street corner and watch for Monsieur Castorade to go into the restaurant. Then we'd wait 10 minutes, so we wouldn't have to sit at the same table as him. He didn't want Monsieur Castorade lecturing us at lunch about news, accidents, and the rules of proper writing. I think he must have made a deal with the restaurant manager to give us the table furthest away from Monsieur Castorade. At the restaurant door, Papa would say, "Let's take our glasses off. This way, we can say we didn't see Monsieur Castorade." It was a clever idea. This way, we had an excuse not to see him. Usually, while we were eating at Restaurant Picardy, people Papa worked with would come over to him and sit at our table. I'd listen to their conversations, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. Most of them were dark-haired, mustached men in worn-out raincoats. Among them was a red-haired man who wore glasses. He always listened to Papa with his mouth open and his eyes wide. I don't remember exactly, but if I'm not mistaken, his name was Chiraud. One day, when he was staring at Papa with his mouth open, Papa said, "Well, Chiraud, what can you do with 50 canceled airline seats?" Chiraud's eyes widened. He asked, "Canceled seats? What kind of seats?" "Seats from airplanes, canceled ones." "Oh, and what can you do with canceled airline seats?" "Lots of things. You could turn them into cinema seats." Chiraud, with his mouth still open, blinked several times, then said, "Ah, certitude, what an imagination you have. You never cease to amaze me. Very well, I'll take them." The admiration shining in Chiraud's eyes amazed me too. I always asked myself, what exactly was Papa's job? One afternoon, when I was alone with Papa in the shop, I asked him about his job. Papa hesitated and said, "Well, how can I put it, my dear? It's hard to explain. Our job is to facilitate transport throughout Europe. In every country, there's a place called a transit center. And at its head, well, the short and simple of it is, people send us their boxes and packages. We keep their packages for them. Then we send them to someone else. Then other packages arrive for us, and the story goes on." Papa said, "Let me put it this way. My job is all about these packages. When the weather got warm, Papa would take me to the park near the St. Ambroise Church every evening. At the playground, I'd see my friends and classmates and play with them. Papa would sit on a bench. He'd watch us play, distractedly. I'd see those dark-haired, mustached men in worn-out raincoats coming up to him. The same ones who came to Restaurant Picardy at lunchtime. Chiraud and the others would come, one by one, sit with Papa, and talk. Papa would be scribbling notes in his notebook the whole time. When it got dark, Papa would call out, "Come on, Catherine, time to go." Then we'd walk together towards Rue d'Hauteville. On the way, Papa would grumble, "Castorade is going to be furious with me. He doesn't know I make most of my business deals in the park. Crazy to stay in the office in this weather." When we reached the office, I'd see that Papa was right. Monsieur Castorade would be sitting at the back of the shop, furious and fuming, waiting for Papa, just as Papa had said. Papa would start the conversation preemptively. "Everything is going well, Raymond." Monsieur Castorade, frowning, would say, "You know, Georges, honestly, someone needs to be in the office working for things to go well." Then, turning to me, he'd ask, "Mademoiselle, which French poets did you read at school today?" I'd give my usual answer, "Victor Hugo and Verlaine." Monsieur Castorade would say, "The same ones again. I simply don't understand. Doesn't France have any other poets?" The world of poetry is vast. For example, Papa and I knew that at times like this, we shouldn't argue or disagree with Monsieur Castorade. Papa would sit at his desk. I'd stare silently at Monsieur Castorade. Then Monsieur Castorade would pull a poetry collection from his coat pocket and say, "I want to read you a sample of poetry, a true poem." Then, tapping his hand on the desk for rhythm, he'd recite poetry for us, delicate melodic poems. I remember some of them. "By her crystalline form she swore, on an autumn night right there in the gloomy cell." I'd get tired very quickly. I'd take my glasses off, and sit on Papa's lap until I fell asleep. A few hours later, Papa would wake me up. Still yawning, he'd say, "He finally left. If you want, put your glasses on." Then we'd put our glasses on, we'd pull down the metal shutter and go home. Papa would wake me up. He'd make breakfast. He'd set it on the table in my room and wait for me. Before I came in, he'd open the windows to let in fresh air. I usually sat on the chair near the window. Savoring my breakfast, I'd gaze at the view outside. Slate roofs and the glass roof of the Gare de l'Est station. The same view every day. Papa, usually with his back to the window, would be tying his tie in the mirror, saying seriously, "To our health." Papa shaved every day, but his shaving wasn't so simple. It was a special ritual. First, he'd chase me with the shaving brush to get my face dirty with lather. Then we'd sit on the chair and clean our glasses, which had gotten smudged with the shaving brush. One day while we were having breakfast, we heard the shop bell ring. Papa immediately ran downstairs to raise the metal shutter. I followed to help him. When we raised the shutter, I saw a truck parked in front of the shop. It had a canvas cover. Something was written on it in Spanish. 3 men were unloading packages from the back of the truck onto the sidewalk. Papa asked them to take the boxes inside the shop. Then he went to call Monsieur Casterade. When the men had unloaded all the boxes, Papa signed their receipt. The men drove off with a roar from the truck's engine. When Monsieur Casterade arrived, Papa opened the boxes. Inside were beautiful statues, some of which were broken. We placed the broken pieces of the statues on the shelves in the shop. Then Papa put the undamaged statues back in their boxes and called someone. A language I couldn't understand. When Papa hung up the phone, Monsieur Casterade said, "George, do you have any idea what kind of mess you've gotten yourself into? Have you forgotten about that business with 1,000 pairs of ski boots? If I hadn't gotten them through customs, you'd be behind bars right now." Papa took off his glasses, but said nothing. That same night, another truck came and picked up the boxes, but the broken pieces of the statues remained on the shop shelves. From then on, Papa and I had a new pastime. Every night we'd stay in the shop. We'd glue the broken statue pieces back together. Then we'd place the statues we'd restored with glue next to each other on the shelf and look at them. Looking at the statues, Papa said, "Little Catherine, would you like to go to mime class like your mama?" I immediately agreed. Papa enrolled me in a class in our own neighborhood, on Rue Ménilmontant. I still remember our first session. Our instructor, Madame Galina Dismailova, came up to me and said I had to take my glasses off during practice. At first, I envied my classmates who didn't wear glasses. Everything seemed easier for them than for me. But then my opinion changed 180 degrees. I had one big advantage over my classmates. I lived in 2 different worlds. 2 different worlds that depended on whether I wore my glasses or not. The world without glasses wasn't the real world. It was a world where instead of walking, I twirled and jumped and moved my feet in the air. The hazy, delicate world without glasses. The dream world, not the real world. After the first session, I told Papa, I really like practicing without my glasses. Papa was surprised by my enthusiasm and determined tone. He said again, "If I weren't nearsighted like the others, I wouldn't be able to practice so well." I just realized that wearing glasses during practice was a kind of advantage. Papa smiled, shaking his head, and said, Yes, it's an advantage. You're just like me when I was young. When you don't wear glasses, the world becomes more appealing to you. It's as if the world sinks into a mist that makes everything softer. I call it the dream world. My classes were on Thursday afternoons. My father would accompany me. The large window of our classroom overlooked the train station. The mothers of the children would sit on a bench, a red leather bench. But Papa, the only father among the parents, would stretch out at the far end of the bench and watch us practice. Sometimes he'd gaze through the glass window at the back of the hall at the train station and the trains arriving and departing. Trains heading to distant destinations, maybe as far as Russia. Papa said our instructor, Madame Dismailova's homeland, was Russia. Madame Dismailova, with her thick Russian accent, would constantly give us orders. Feet forward, now back. Hands up, now one leg up. Turn on one foot. Hold your foot with your hand. Now turn. Now the other leg. Once, when Papa was busy, he didn't come to class with me. I went alone, but on my way back I realized I had left my glasses in the classroom. I had to go back to Rue Ménilmontant. I knocked, but no one opened the door. The caretaker gave me the spare key to the classroom. As soon as I turned on the classroom light, I had to laugh. I couldn't believe that the large hall, which had been so crowded and noisy just half an hour ago, was now so empty and quiet. Suddenly I felt like practicing alone. All I had to do was not wear my glasses to daydream a little. It was easy for me to hear Madame Dismailova's voice saying, "Feet forward, now back, hands up, now one leg up, turn on one foot, hold your foot with your hand, now turn, now the other leg." To the sound of Madame Dismailova's voice, I practiced until I was out of breath. Finally, I put my glasses on. Before leaving, I went to the large glass window at the back of the hall and stared at the platforms of the Gare du Nord. A while ago, I found an old photo from those days in Paris. Cherot had taken it. The same red-haired, bespectacled man who looked at Papa with his mouth open and eyes wide. The photo was from a Thursday afternoon. Before I went to class with Papa, Cherot had taken it in front of the shop, of me, Papa, and Monsieur Castorade. I was standing between Papa and Monsieur Castorade. Monsieur Castorade was very happy and cheerful that day. Imitating me, he had his hands in the air and his legs crossed. There was also a lady in the corner of our photo. I have a vague memory of her. I remember one night, as she was leaving Papa's office, she said, "See you later, Georges." Once, when I asked Papa who that lady was, Papa got flustered and quickly said, "She's an air hostess." 20 years later, when I showed the photo to Papa and asked, "Who is this lady in the corner of the photo? Do you know her?" Papa looked at the ceiling and repeated the same sentence from 20 years ago. "She's an air hostess, nobody special." I only had one friend in mime class, a little girl who came to Madame Dismailova's class alone every Thursday without her mother. Her name was Adele. Adele was the one who started talking to me. When I took my glasses off and put them on the chair, she came over. She looked at me and my glasses, then said, "Lucky you, wearing glasses. I've always wanted to wear glasses. Can I try on your glasses for a minute?" I nodded and gave them to her. She put them on. Then she admired herself in the big classroom mirror with the glasses on. After class, Adele said she would walk with us as far as the metro station. When we reached the metro entrance, a lady near the newspaper kiosk on Boulevard Rochechouart was waiting for Adele. As soon as she saw Adele, she came forward. She had a newspaper in her hand. She looked very serious. She was wearing flat shoes and a long raincoat. She said, "As usual, you're late." Adele said, "Sorry, Mademoiselle Sergion." Adele later told me that Mademoiselle Sergion was her nanny. Before Adele got on the metro with Mademoiselle Sergion, she gave me an envelope. Inside the envelope was a card. On it, in large gold letters, was written, "Monsieur and Madame Ralph Ancorn invite you, Catherine and her father, to attend their spring party on Friday, April 22nd, at 5 p.m. at 21 Boulevard Saussure. Please let us know if you can attend." Catherine and her father was written on the card in handwriting. It was obvious that Adele had written the invitation herself. I'm still amazed that Papa didn't realize Adele had invited us without her parents' knowledge. As soon as Papa saw the invitation, he said, "Tomorrow is Friday. We must let them know immediately that we accept." Right then, Monsieur Castorade arrived and found out about the invitation. Delighted, he clapped his hands and said, "I'll dictate the reply letter right now." Papa quickly sat at his desk. Monsieur Castorade puffed out his chest and cleared his throat. "Dear friends, my daughter Catherine and I gladly accept your invitation. It is a great honor for us to attend your party. Therefore, we will be with you on Friday on Boulevard Saussure. With great respect, yours sincerely, Georges Certitude, and daughter." Papa asked, surprised, "And daughter?" Monsieur Castorade said firmly, "And daughter," in old French construction. Papa said, "We must get this letter to them tonight." Then he got on the phone. From his conversation, I understood he was talking to Cheryl. Papa asked Cheryl to come to the shop. He said it was urgent. Cheryl came right away. Papa gave the letter to Cheryl and said, "Could I ask you to deliver this letter immediately to 21 Boulevard Saussure?" Cheryl, with wide eyes, said, "Immediately?" Papa said calmly, "Yes, please. And please come for us tomorrow as well. You need to take us in your pickup truck to the address on this letter." Cheryl, still staring at Papa with wide eyes, said, "Monsieur Certitude, you surprise me." Papa said, "I give you 4 rows of canceled airplane seats for free. What do you think?" Cheryl stroked his chin. He was obviously thinking about Papa's offer. Finally, he said, "Okay, why not?" Then he took the letter and left. Papa was very eager for the Ancorns' spring party. He kept pacing the room and repeating, "The Ancorns are very respectful people. They make plans for the future all day long." Later, sitting on a bench at the Place Saint-Ambroise after lunch, staring into the distance as if lost in his dreams, he said, "Little Catherine, you know our lives are going to get much better. Much, much better. You know, to succeed, you just need to have the right people around you. That's the most important thing. I'm so eager to meet the Ancorns and get to know them soon." Finally, it was time to get ready for the party. After much hesitation, Papa agreed to wear his chocolate brown suit. At first, he put on his navy blue suit, but then he thought the navy was too formal for a spring party. Papa had his hat on and his gloves in his hand when Cheryl arrived in his pickup truck. Papa and I got into Cheryl's truck without delay. As soon as we sat down, Papa slapped his knee and said, 21 Boulevard Saussure, Cheryl." Cheryl, with his mouth open and eyes wide, looked at Papa as if he were giving orders to his driver, then drove off noisily towards 21 Boulevard Saussure. We had just reached Boulevard Saussure when Papa slapped his thigh again and said, "Stop here. We'll get off here." Cheryl, with his round eyes, said, "But we haven't arrived yet. Number 21 is further on." Papa slapped his knee again and said, "I'd prefer to get off here. We'll walk the rest of the way." We got out of the car as Cheryl watched us with his mouth open and eyes wide. Before getting out, Papa gave his final instructions. "Come for us at 9 o'clock, Cheryl. Right here, not in front of number 21. Cheryl, struggling to close his mouth, said with wide eyes, "Whatever you wish, Monsieur Certitude." Papa and I started walking towards building number 21. The Ancorns' mansion was set in a garden with manicured lawns and stone pathways. To the left of the garden was a parking area for the guests' luxurious, expensive cars. Adele was waiting for us near the entrance. As soon as she saw us, she ran over and said, "Thank goodness you came. I was so worried you wouldn't." Then she took my arm, smiled, and said, "I'm so happy you're here." Adele guided us towards the mansion's elevator. The elevator walls were lined with red velvet. As Papa got into the elevator, he touched the wall and said, "Nice elevator. We should install one of these between the office and our place." It was obvious he was trying to show off, but I knew it was all from nervousness. He kept adjusting his tie knot and his hat. We soon arrived at the mansion's terrace, where the spring party was being held. Waiters with trays of drinks and hors d'oeuvres were circulating among the guests. The guests were wearing light, cool summer clothes. They were gathered in small groups or sitting under sun umbrellas. The weather was sunny with a cool breeze blowing. Adele and I were the only children at the party. Papa was bending over and shaking hands with everyone quickly. With each handshake he repeated, "Georges Certitude, pleased to meet you." Papa's behavior seemed out of place among the stylish, well-dressed guests. Nervously fiddling with the brim of his hat and his tie knot, he whispered introductions to me. "Little Catherine, see that blonde, well-dressed gentleman. He's the best tailor in Paris. That man in the riding breeches is a polo player, probably just back from the bagatelle competition. That red-haired lady is Sacha Guitry's wife. See over there who he's talking to? Owner of a famous beverage company. The one whose name is plastered all over the metro. It's on the tip of my tongue. Dubonnet. Dubonnet." The more agitated Papa became, the more and louder he talked. "Oh my God, look over there. That dark-haired gentleman looks so much like Prince Ali Khan. Maybe it is him. Adele, Is that gentleman Prince Ali Khan? Adele, who didn't seem to want to disappoint Papa or say anything against his wishes, said, "Well, yes, it is." Papa was bending over backwards to insert himself into the guests' conversations. His chocolate brown suit clashed with the light summery colors of the guests' cool clothes. The guests talked among themselves, ignoring Papa. The man Papa said was a famous tailor pointed to a top-of-the-line car parked in the special parking area and said, "Last night I nearly killed myself with this old Talbot. You know, I confess my weakness is these Talbot cars." The polo player said, "My weakness is Delahaye's. I like them because they're so unmanageable. You can never rely on their brakes." Papa squeezed my hand. I knew he was gathering his courage to join their conversation. Finally, he said the wittiest thing that came to mind. "Nothing beats front-wheel drive cars. I'm still loyal to them." Then he pointed to a Citroën parked down on the street. But no one reacted to Papa's words. It was as if no one had heard his comment. Only a waiter passing by with a tray said, "I think your car just got stolen." Papa looked at the front-wheel drive car driving away. Very calmly he said, No problem. My driver must have gone for a cigarette." Then he turned back to the stylish guests on the terrace. He tried once more to join their group. "The downside of these front-wheel drive cars is they have weak engines." But this comment, like his previous one, didn't attract any attention. To calm himself, Papa took several glasses from the waiter's tray and downed them in one gulp. Then turning to Adele, who had been beside us the whole time, he said, "You know, I haven't met your parents yet. I'd really like you to introduce me." Adele blushed and said, Actually, my parents are very busy, but I should introduce you to them." Flustered, she took us from among the guests and rushed us to the back of the terrace. She approached a blonde woman with sunglasses standing next to a man with shiny black hair. The woman and man were as impeccably dressed and groomed as Prince Ali Khan and the polo player. Adele went up to the blonde woman and whispered, "Mama, I want to introduce you to Monsieur Certitude." Her mother asked, puzzled, "What?" Papa quickly stepped forward, nodding his head, and said, "Pleased to meet you." But Adele's mother could barely see Papa behind her sunglasses. Adele went over to the dark-haired man to get her father's attention, tugging at his sleeve. "Papa, this is Monsieur Certitude, and this is my friend Catherine Certitude from my mime class." Papa said, "Pleased to meet you." Adele's father shook Papa's hand indifferently, saying, Then he resumed his conversation with his wife and friends. Papa was a bit taken aback, disappointed, but not yet defeated. He said again, "We came in a front-wheel drive car." One of those sentences that just pops out of your mouth and is as glaring as a car's fog light. But again, Monsieur and Madame Ancorn showed no reaction. Adele, tired of standing there, pulled my hand and took me to show me her room. When we returned to the terrace, Papa was talking to a stocky, mustached man. Papa and the mustached man were speaking a language I didn't understand. At the end of their conversation, the mustached man traced an imaginary circle with his index finger. He put his palm to his ear, probably meaning they'd be in touch. Then he walked away. I asked Papa, "Who was that gentleman?" Papa, cheerful and happy, said, "So important that if he helps me in my business, our lives will be turned upside down." Papa glanced at his watch. It was time to go. We went outside. Chiraud was waiting for us in his pickup truck at the beginning of the boulevard. As soon as he saw us from a distance, he stuck his hand out the window and waved. Papa turned around quickly. He took a covert look back at the mansion terrace, from where the laughter of the guests could still be heard. He muttered under his breath, "Discretion is the better part of valor." We were walking towards Chiraud's pickup when Adele came running after us. Embarrassed, she smiled. To console us, she said, "Why did you leave without saying goodbye? Were you really bored at the party?" Papa said, "Not at all. Thank you for inviting us. Actually, little Adele, you've set me on the right track. Thanks to this party, I'm going to move up a few notches in my work and business." Papa and I stood next to Chiraud's truck. Adele looked at us, puzzled. After a pause, she asked, "So what happened to your car?" Papa said calmly, "It got stolen." Then he leaned toward Chiraud, who was waiting for us in the truck. "Chiraud, my friend, thank you for coming. Would you be so kind as to take us to the nearest police station? I need to report a theft." Adele was looking at Papa with wide eyes, listening intently, when suddenly our eyes met. Adele immediately looked down and blushed. As we drove back in Chiro's pickup, Papa said to me, "For as long as I live, I'll be grateful to my friend Adele for inviting us to tonight's party. I had a long talk with someone who's going to make my business prosper." I never saw Adele again. She stopped coming to class. I was very upset. I asked Madame Dismailova about her. "Do you have any news about Adele? Why doesn't she come to class anymore?" Madame Dismailova said, "I have no idea. All I know is they owe me a month's tuition." Papa and I searched hard for their phone number, but no number under the name Ancorn was listed in the phone book. I told Papa we should write them a letter, but Papa said, "Leave it to me, dear. I'll get their number from Tebelian once I've sorted things out with him. Don't worry. You'll find Adele very soon." Tebelian, a name that still stirs my feelings whenever I remember it. Tebelian, a name that preoccupied Papa's mind for a long time. 30 years have passed since the night of the Ancorn spring party, but Papa still keeps Tebelian's business card in his pocket. The paper had yellowed, and the writing had faded. René Tebelian, SFAIC, 1 Rue Lord Byron, 8th Arrondissement, Élysée 835. Tebelian was the only person Papa had talked to at the Ancorn party. After that party, every now and then, Papa would ask me, "Catherine, do you remember Tebelian?" Yes, I remembered Tebelian, stocky and mustached, with his open collar and crocodile belt. I remembered he spoke to Papa in a kind of code. Papa never lost hope. Whenever he remembered the party in Tebelian, he would call the number on the business card. But either no one answered, or I would hear Papa's voice saying, "George Certitude here. Can I speak to Monsieur Tebelian? Then please tell him to call me back." Although Tebelian never called Papa back, Papa still believed in him, a steadfast belief. Most of the time, he would say to Chiro, "You know, people like Tebelian aren't satisfied with just anything, like cancelled airline seats. That's the difference between them and other people. They won't settle for anything less than a whole plane and all its equipment." At times like this, Monsieur Castorade would taunt Papa. "Still no news from the legendary Monsieur Tebelian?" Papa would shrug his shoulders and say, "You just don't understand a man of Tebelian's stature." When Papa came to pick me up, when we were alone, he would talk about various things. One winter night, walking back from class on Rue Ménilmontant, Papa suddenly said, "Catherine, now I understand. My father was right to stay in this neighborhood and set up his shop on Rue de Hauteville. Do you know why my father chose this place to live? Because it has a train station. That way, whenever he decided to, the conditions for leaving were in place." What if one day we want to leave, Catherine? Do you like traveling? Don't you want to see new places? I remember the last time we were going to Madame Dismailova's class. Papa said to me on the way, "Catherine, isn't it funny? I knew Madame Dismailova from before. I recognized her as soon as I saw her. But Madame Dismailova didn't recognize me, because I'm not like I was in my youth. I've changed a lot since then. Actually, in the old days, I didn't just work in the shop all the time. I was an extra. Sometimes they'd give me small parts in shows at Parisian cafes. One night, they asked me to play the role of the gentleman accompanying your mother in a play. We didn't know each other then. She taught me how to coordinate my steps with hers and enter the stage. But as soon as I stepped onto the stage without my glasses, I tripped and fell flat on my face. Your mother and I both ended up sprawled on the floor. Your mother thought it was funny because she burst out laughing. It was in that cafe that I met Madame Dismailova. Madame Dismailova was also in the same theater group as your mother. Papa, as if afraid someone might be following us or overhearing, turned and looked behind us. He slowed down, leaned towards me, and whispered in my ear. In those days, she wasn't Galina Dismailova. Her name was Almarché. She wasn't Russian. She was from Sens, in the Yonne department. Her parents were respectable people who had a little cafe in Sens. Sometimes when we had no work in Paris, they'd invite us to their town. She was a good friend. Back then, she didn't have a Russian accent. When we arrived at the class, Papa, as usual, sat at the far end of the long red leather bench, away from my classmates' mothers. The class started on time. Madame Dismailova, as usual with her Russian accent, said, "Feet forward. Now back. Hands up. Now one leg up. Turn on one foot. Hold your foot with your hand. Now turn. Now the other leg. All through class, I longed to hear Madame Dismailova's real voice, without the accent. Our class ended at 7 p.m. Madame Dismailova, with the same Russian accent, said, "Goodbye, children. See you next Thursday." I whispered to Papa, "We have to talk to her. We have to call her by her real name." Papa laughed and said, "You don't expect me to say, 'Hi there from Sens, how are your friends?'" I stared at Papa. We were both silent for a few moments. Then Papa said, No, I don't want to do that to her. Let her live in her own dream." In Paris, every day I used to check the mailbox before school. I'd take the letters out of the box and give them to Papa. I was always eager for the 2 letters that came from America, one for me, one for Papa. One day, I checked the mailbox as usual. There were 2 letters inside. Mama's letter for me and Papa. Papa's letter was thick, but mine was short and sweet. "My dear Catherine, I think soon the 3 of us will be together again. Warm kisses, Mama." Papa took his letter into the office to read it carefully and calmly later. On the way, he said, "Great news has arrived from America." When we got to the office, Monsieur Casteret was waiting for us to recite poetry. Tapping his hand on the desk for rhythm, he began in his monotonous voice. His monotonous voice and tapping were like a lullaby. On an autumn night in the gloomy cell, I had taken my glasses off and was struggling to keep my eyes open. I was about to fall asleep when Papa suddenly interrupted Monsieur Casteret mid-recitation. "Excuse me, Raymond, but I've reserved a table for 7:30 tonight at the Marais restaurant in Châtelet. I want to take my daughter there." Monsieur Casteret closed his poetry book, puffed out his chest, shook his head regretfully, and said, "The world has become strange. Now the Marais restaurant is more important than French poetry. People prefer a dozen oysters to a 12-syllable literary piece. Well, I can only say, enjoy yourselves." He said very seriously, "Raymond, there's an important matter I need to tell you about. My daughter and I are going to America soon." I was so shocked by Papa's words that I quickly put my glasses on. I wanted to make sure I was awake and not dreaming. Monsieur Casteret was also taken aback. After a moment, he said, "America? You want to go to America?" Papa said, "Yes." Monsieur Casteret slumped in his swivel chair behind his desk. He asked weakly, "What about me? Have you thought about me?" Papa said, "Of course I've thought about you. I'm leaving you the shop. Just like that. I'm in a hurry right now. We'll talk about it in detail tomorrow." Papa took my arm, and we headed for the shop door. Monsieur Casteret was still frozen in his swivel chair, repeating in disbelief, "America, America. Who do you think you are, really?" Outside the shop, Papa said to me, "I invited you to dinner tonight to talk about our trip to America. We're finally going to America to be with your mother." After dinner, Papa called the waiter over. He ordered a peach melba with raspberry sauce for me. Then he lit a cigarette and said, "3 years have passed since your mother went back to America. I was very sad, but your mother wanted to live there, in her own country. I had promised her that as soon as I sorted out my affairs in France, I'd come and join her. Now is that time. It's time for the 3 of us to be together again, in America. You know, before you were born, your mother and I went to Meudon. It was there that your mother predicted everything. She told me, Albert. She called me Albert in those days. She said, 'We're going to have a daughter, and we're going to live in America.' Your mother was right, my dear. Eat your ice cream. Your mother's prediction shouldn't make your ice cream melt. Are you ready to learn your first English lesson?" I nodded silently. Papa said, "In English, peach melba with raspberry sauce is called ice cream." When we came out of the restaurant, it was still light out. It was summer. In those days, black and red G7 taxis and articulated buses waited for passengers in Place de Clichy, the tall trees of the glorious and majestic Trocadero. Papa, looking around, said, "The weather is lovely. How about we walk back? We can go back home via the Montmartre Hill." I nodded. We started walking up Rue Caulaincourt. Papa put his hand on my shoulder and said, "I'll book boat tickets for next month. Your mother will meet us at the New York pier." About finally, after all this separation, going to be with her. I was so happy I was going to see her again. Papa said again, You'll go to school in New York to learn English, and your mother will help you with both English and mime. You know your mother is more experienced than Madame Dismailova. When I met your mother, she was a star of the stage. As we came down the steps of Montmartre, Papa hugged me, lifted me up in his arms, and carried me all the way down Rue Trudaine. Just like they used to do in Parisian theater troupes, he chanted, "Don't be afraid, Catherine. I won't drop you. I'm very experienced." Papa spent the whole next week in the shop with Monsieur Casterade and Chiraud. I'd see them sitting around a table with lots of papers in front of them to sign. Monsieur Casterade kept shouting, "George, sign here. Chiraud, don't forget to write, 'I accept this agreement' here." One night, when Papa was still in the office and Casterade and Chiraud were heading for the door, I heard Casterade say to Chiraud, "From now on, everything must be clear. No more trouble or hassle, no more turning things upside down. Everything strictly by the book, from the moment we start work until we finish. Everything must be legal." Chiraud said, "Of course, that goes without saying." But he shook his head in a way that suggested he regretted it. Monsieur Casterade quickly set about making changes. He brought in a workman to take down the sign, "Casterade and Certitude Experience." In its place, he put up a new sign, "Casterade and his deputy, Chiraud." The letters on the new sign were red instead of azure blue. The large letters Casterade sparkled in the sunlight, leaving no room for Chiraud's smaller letters to show. After handing over the shop, Papa had more time. He picked me up from school every day. When we reached the shop, we saw Casterade standing with his arms crossed in front of the door, as if he'd been the owner all along. Papa grumbled. He could have waited until we left. He'd invited us to a farewell dinner at Restaurant Picardy. Chiraud was also invited. We had just been served when Casterade stood up with a piece of paper in his hand and said, "In honor of your departure for America, I've written a poem which I dedicate to you. Now that you stand on the ship's prow, now that you head towards America, do not forget the memory of your friends in Paris. Though New York is beautiful and Broadway legendary, the Butte Montmartre is also unforgettable." Papa, Chiraud, and I applauded Casterade enthusiastically. We were truly touched by his poem. It was the first time during one of Casterade's poetry readings that I hadn't taken my glasses off and had listened to the whole poem. After dinner, Papa and I walked to the St. Ambroise Church. We sat on a bench in the park near the church. Papa, staring at the horizon ahead, said, "We're going to be happy in America." "Very happy, you'll see, little Catherine. As the Americans say, we're going to enter a new world." But as Casterade said, we mustn't forget France. At the time, I didn't pay much attention to Papa's words. But after all these years, I can still hear his voice and his words. It's as if I'm still that child on the bench in the park near St. Ambroise. I often think of my school on Rue de Petits Hotels, the playground where I played with my classmates, the large glass scale in the shop, Casterade reciting poetry for us, Madame Dismailova and her Russian accent, whose real voice I never got to hear. We are still the same people. The same people from the past. We go on living until our time is up. Just as before. After us, I suppose, there will be another Catherine Certitude, walking with her father through the streets of the 10th arrondissement of Paris. Last night, I went with my daughter to see my parents in Greenwich Village. They live together now, although Mama sometimes threatens Papa in her American accent that one day she'll leave. She says she's tired of Papa's tricks. Mr. Smith, Papa's new partner, agrees with Mama. Mr. Smith is as picky as Casterade. I imagine the taxi dropping me off in front of my parents' brick building. As I get out, I see Papa's silhouette upstairs, behind one of the windows.
Probably tying his tie, saying, "To our health."